that she previously had endorsed in the campaign, which was, previously she said, I agree with all of the changes in the Biden budget on taxes. And now the context here, right, is that we're going to have this huge discussion about taxes in 2025. The Trump tax cuts for individual rates expire. And so under current law, all of those individual taxes are going to go. Harris has stuck to the Biden pledge that nobody making under $400,000 a year is going to get a tax increase. And that's going to cost trillions of dollars. So there are compensatory plans to not only cover that amount, but to raise trillions of dollars more, some of which can be put into expanding the child tax credit and some other programs that the administration, or that the incoming Harris potential administration, wants to do. And among those was a significant hike in the capital gains tax to actually equalize taxation on capital with taxation on income. They were both going to be 39.6% plus a surcharge that is from Medicare. And, she accepted this. She said, this is my plan. And then this week decided maybe this isn't my plan. So Bob, you've been talking to some people about this. Tell us about what you think here.
Well, so to give her the benefit of the doubt, and I'm not sure I want to give her the benefit of the doubt, but you could say that, well, it's not all that much money, right? You pointed out in your own piece on this, David, that the $50,000 tax break for small businesses in the first year of their startup, that's going to cost something like $11 billion over 10 years.
That's a separate thing that we'll talk about later, but yes.
And so the two of the three big Biden plans, the capital gains increase and the so-called step up in basis, where you don't get a tax loophole, your heirs don't get a tax loophole on capital gains.
Basically, if you have holdings that you never sold and you die, the new cost basis for all of those holdings goes up to where it was the day you died.
Right.
And that saves a massive amount of money because you could have, Apple at $2 a share. It goes to $500 a share, and then you die and you pass that stock on to your heirs, and their basis is $500 a share. So they saved all of those capital gains.
So the government has not costed out the difference between the Biden proposal to raise the capital gains rate to the rate on ordinary income and the now modified Harris proposal to max it out at 28%. But I talked to our friends at the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, and they said that the 10-year cost of this is order of magnitude $50 billion. So you could say, well, that's not that much money. But on the other hand, I think there are three really serious things wrong with it. One, you alluded to it, $50 billion is not chump change, and we need to be raising trillions of dollars. And the only decent place to raise it from is rich people, because rich people have been walking off with such a large share of the total increment in GDP. Secondly, the problem is that even if it doesn't change very many votes among very, very rich people, given the pressure that her donors have been putting on her, it looks like she's caving into her rich donors. And that looks like hell. And the third problem is that it reinforces the image of Kamala Harris as a flip-flopper. And of course, compared to Trump, Kamala is completely steadfast. But you don't want to give aid and comfort to the claim that, oh, she's just another flip-flopper. And of course, you have the situation where she changed her view on fracking. She was originally for a fracking ban. Now she's not for a fracking ban. I actually think that's more defensible. I mean, I would rather have her, have stood up and said, look, I've changed my views because I got to carry Pennsylvania, because that's the reality. But instead, she said, well, we've made so many gains on climate that we can afford to tolerate fracking. Okay, it doesn't pass the Pinocchio test, but
Hmm.
I think that's defensible politically, right? I think giving away this capital gains break to people who are staggeringly rich, that's not even defensible politically. How many votes is it
Right.
going to change? It makes her look like hell, both in terms of making her look like someone who's caving into pressure from her donors, and makes her look like a flip-flopper. So I
Yeah.
don't. It.
The
I,
latter thing, yeah,
it,
the
it,
latter
it,
thing was kind of my point. Um, you know, Nobody put a gun to Kamala Harris's head and said, you have to accept all of the elements of the Biden budget as far as taxation goes. She didn't have to do that. She could have
right.
come out later with a tax plan that is much like the tax plan now. There would have been no ability to say, "Oh, she flip flopped, she changed her vote," or
Or
whatever.
she could have offset the 50 billion that we're going to lose by having a
Right, in
lower
some other
ceiling
way.
some other way. But
Right,
so I think it's not good politics. You can argue around the margin about what's good economics.
right. Yeah, I agree with that. It's she comes out and now says, "Well, actually, I agree with everything in there, but," and it invites questions about every other aspect of that plan. The thing
Yeah.
that's been kind of beaten up the most is this idea. I believe it's called a billionaire's minimum tax. This idea for a tax on unrealized capital gains. Um, and that's been taking a beating. And you can just see now that she's changed and lowered the rate of capital gains taxation, that she's ripe to now have to change that. And
Well,
and
yeah,
it's not a thing that's probably even going to ever pass Congress. Like she should have done figured out what she was going to do and then say it rather than adopt this very maximalist position and then change it before we even get to the negotiation.
well, and in terms of really fundamental tax reform, radical tax reform, the two most radical parts of this are not raising the capital gains rate. Two most radical parts of this are taxing unrealized gains, which
Right,
nobody's ever done, and secondarily, so-called stepped up basis, which is a really
right,
fundamental reform. And what's weird is that she appears to be sticking to those, but tweaking the top capital gains rate, which is
exactly.
bizarre.
But
So
it just feels like a prelude. It feels like a prelude because those other two things are going to be guarded much more zealously than a modest change in the rate. And you, I personally I think stepped up basis is a no brainer. This is a massive unearned tax break to
yeah, but
heirs
it's
essentially.
politically it's a heavy lift.
It is a heavy lift because there are a lot of rich people in Congress, and then they all talk to a lot of rich people too. So that's why it's a heavy lift. The other thing that you can do that hasn't been added to the debate is that you can say, well, this whole concept where a mega rich person has a ton of assets, maybe in their own company, and then they borrow against those assets, use those assets as collateral, and then they die, right? There's an argument to make that, okay, if you're borrowing against equity, we're going to tax that borrowing against equity. That hasn't been in the debate either. So instead, now what we have is these two things that are very politically heavy lifts, and she's already shown weakness on the easy thing or the easier thing, which is the rate. Maybe she thought that the rate was more digestible to people. Like, yeah, we're going to give people the ability to invest at a lower rate, etc. But I feel like there's blood in the water now
Well,
around these other
yeah,
topics.
exactly. And so the calculus was, well, okay, let's throw a bone to our donors who've been complaining that we're too big on taxing the rich, but it's more like throwing chum at the fish. It's only going to attract
That's
more.
right. That's right. I agree. And then the other part of the speech, which you alluded to before, was this new expanded tax break on startup companies and small businesses for their startup costs. Right now, you get to deduct something like $5,000 in startup costs. and she wants to raise it to 50,000. This is not a huge tax break, as we said. The Biden administration, there's also like the whole premise of it is we need more small business formation, and that's a mistaken premise. We've had a massive amount of small business formation in the last 4 years since the pandemic. 19 million new applications for startups. It's been a real under the radar success of the Biden administration. And they didn't need like a new tax break. Nobody was clamoring for a new tax break to do it. I'm sure small businesses will take it. It's free money, but there was no compelling kind of clamoring for this. I actually talked to the Main Street Alliance and some of these other small business organizations. I looked at a bunch of surveys. If you ask small businesses, what is the biggest hindrance to what your, to your future success? It's access to credit. It's the ability to have the working capital to start the business in the first place. Getting a tax break on expenses after the business has started is less impactful than getting the money up front to be able to start the business. And so I think there was a kind of a misguided look here at what it actually would take to make small businesses successful.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wasn't in the room where these two policies were decided, but you can imagine the conversation, right? We have to do something symbolic to show that we really care about small business, and we have to show our donors that we're not, communists wanting to tax the filthy rich. So let's just shave off the capital gains rate. It's just, it's really bad politics because they did not think through the knock-on effects.
Yeah, I agree. And it shows a level of thinking where the policy is being driven by the politics.
But it's being driven by stupid politics.
Yeah, it's not
worst
good
of both
politics,
worlds.
but it's
if the policy were being driven by the politics and it were astute politics, like maybe the fracking reversal is astute politics,
right.
you could say,
Right.
okay, it's politics, but this is not even good politics.
Right. Now, looking to the other side, which also has been engaged in some bad politics of late, there's an opportunity here. Now, Congress comes back in session. They're obviously all they want to do is pass a continuing resolution, get the government funded through the election, and go home. But Trump last week, and I wrote about this at the beginning of the week, came out saying, because he's getting hammered on abortion. He's been hammered on abortion for months and months and months. He sees it as a key reason why Republicans essentially did not do as well in 2022. It's a threat to his victory. And so he came out and said he was talking about IVF because the whole idea of banning abortion has bled into these other things like in vitro fertilization. And he said, well, we're going to have the government pay for IVF, or we're going to mandate that insurance companies cover the process, right? So the reality is that the Senate voted on a thing called the Right to IVF Act in June, and it included an insurance mandate for IVF. And pretty much every Republican, except for Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, voted against it, including J.D. Vance, who was actually present for that vote in the Senate and voted against it. So there is a pretty compelling case that Chuck Schumer should bring this bill up again and once again cause this wedge between what Trump is out there saying, trying to save his candidacy, and what Republicans are willing to do. And you can see it that even last week, when Lindsey Graham was on one of the Sunday shows and was asked about this, he said, well, I don't like the insurance mandates, but maybe we can do like some means tested tax credit. So they're tying themselves up in knots, like complete knots around this issue. And there is an opportunity here for Schumer to twist the knife.
Well, and meanwhile, the evangelicals are wildly upset with Trump. So
right.
There is no way of finessing.
it's a no-win situation for them.
Yeah.
Either Republicans go along with Trump and get the backlash from their theocratic base, or they decide to break with Trump, and then it's dissension within the Republican ranks. So I think there's a real opportunity there, and we'll see what happens. I got kind of a non-committal response from Schumer's office when I asked him about it, but we'll see what happens. I think there's a decent chance that is what they'll do to highlight this once again.
So, David,
Yeah,
I've been working on two things. I've been working on the issue of turnout, and I've
yeah,
been working on the issue of voter suppression. So,
I was getting to that. So why don't
go
we
for
just kick that
it.
off right now? Go ahead.
So, I think a lot of Democrats have been mystified and disheartened by the fact that even though we had all this energy and this unity at the convention, we're not seeing more than a trivial bounce in the polls. So I
Right.
started digging into that. And one source of comfort, although you have to be very careful in parsing this, is the fact that the big variable that has explained relative Democratic success in the last three elections is turnout. That when you have a high turnout election, other things being equal, and other things are always not equal, but when you have a high turnout election, there's more of an upside among potential Democratic voters who are so-called low propensity voters, African Americans, young people, to some extent, single women. And when you have a high turnout election, that tends to help Democrats more than it helps Republicans. Now, it's too early to see evidence of that, but what you do
Right.
see evidence of is the fact that all of the activists who were energized by the convention and by Harris succeeding Biden as the candidate are now going to go out and redouble their efforts to register
Yeah.
people and get people to vote early and get people to vote by mail. And that's going to boost turnout. And because Trump has been so contemptuous of what other Republican candidates would see as really important on the ground election infrastructure, he doesn't have that. He thinks that the way you boost excitement is just by doing all these rallies. And they
Right.
don't begin to have anything on the Republican side that that matches all the activism on the ground
Well,
that
let's break that down because
translates.
I want to push back on that just a little bit. I think there are metrics where that is absolutely correct. You look at it in money. I believe the Harris campaign announced today that they took in over $350 million in August. So you look at it on that metric, and a lot of that is low dollar money. You look at it in volunteers. You see all these,
Yeah.
white dudes for Harris, engineers for Harris, whatever. You see that excitement. You see it in volunteers. On those metrics, it does appear to be an advantage. However, the other thing about 2016 and 2020 is that Trump largely defied the polls in terms of their turnout models. And what he did was he did actually bring people out who were low propensity voters in rural areas, right? And people who had sort of come out of the woodwork, who had never voted before, and who wouldn't vote for anybody but Trump, because we didn't see this in 2018 or 2022. But in 16 and 20, when Trump was on the ballot, these people came out of the woodwork and decided to vote for Trump. Now, so, and I think you talked to some people about that, right?
Right. Well, I think in terms of these low propensity voters who will come out and vote for Trump, Trump has pretty well maxed out with that demographic. And
Right.
although the conventional wisdom that the upside for Democrats is better than for Republicans in a high turnout election, that absolutely has to be qualified by the point that you just made. But there
Right.
is still a margin where Democrats are likely to do better in an election where their volunteers are motivated and they're going to be beating the bushes to get people to register and get people to vote early and get people to come to the polls. So
Yeah.
it's not a total slam dunk, but I think even if you drill down and look at this, on net, if you can assume a lot of activism on the Democratic side, which I think you can, turnout on balance favors Democrats. But then the
I,
offset, of
I,
course,
now,
is
now, no, wait. Let's get to voter suppression in a minute
yeah,
because I
that's
still
yeah,
want to stay with
right,
this. I still want to stay with this. I'm willing to believe that Trump has maxed out on the turnout side. That everyone who has ever been a non-voter who only comes out for Trump has already
right,
done that in the past two elections. I'm
yeah.
I'm willing to believe that. What I don't know is whether pollsters have put that into their models, right? Are they accounting for this usual surge when Trump is the nominee of these lower propensity voters on the right? That's the question to me,
It's
because
it's un
it matters for what the polls that we're seeing right now.
it's unknowable at this stage of the game because you will not know until later in the fall
Right,
uh, what the increase in voter registration actually is. And
right,
so even if you put it in a model, the model is only as good as its assumptions,
right.
and turnout may
That's
beat
that's
assumptions.
really my question. My
Yeah,
question is the assumption. The other part of this that I've seen some reporting on, and I think we need more of it, is that Trump has essentially outsourced his get out the vote operation
right.
to these conservative groups. They're not like paid by the campaign directly. They're not direct employees of the campaign, but they're people like Charlie Kirk's. I forget the name of his project, but they're these outside groups that have never really done turnout in a national election before. You might remember in 2012, Mitt Romney had created what was alleged to be this great turnout model, and it was using technology. Yeah, Turning Point. Thank you, our behind the scenes producer here. Turning Point USA is the Charlie Kirk organization, and they're doing a lot of the get out the vote. As I said, in 2012, Mitt Romney said, I have this great technology to get out the vote. And it totally crashed on election day. It didn't work at all. And it was a factor in Republicans not being able to hit their turnout numbers. Here, this is being outsourced to people who have no experience turning people out. And it's just sort of trust me. This was at the heart of how the RNC, Ronna McDaniel, got thrown out as the chair of the RNC in favor of, I think, Trump's daughter-in-law and some other dude. It's because they wanted to empower Turning Point USA and some of these other conservative groups to do the get out the vote for them. This is a very under the radar factor. I mean, ground game doesn't always shape an election, but it can be a couple points on the margins. And in an election this close, a couple points is all you need.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, if you look at the excitement factor, the way this plays out, you need the volunteers, you need the party professionals, you need the people who really get into this if they're excited to then go
And who
out and
know how to
do
do
the
it,
work
who know
and
how
know
to
how to
do
do
it.
it.
It's not just random
And
people.
and
Like,
and these
I'm hearing stories about outside groups who are inundating the swing states with mailers right now. People getting like 2 and 3 mailers about Trump every day, and they're registered longtime Democrats who will never vote for Trump. It's a
yeah,
total waste of money, and it
good.
speaks to these very inexperienced groups who are running these kinds of turnout campaigns.
Yep.
And so it's a quiet part of this, but I think it's an important part.
Yep.
All right,
So
so let's
the
go to
other
the voter suppression thing,
yeah,
because that
so
was the other thing you wrote about.
the other offset is voter suppression, and it really breaks into two categories, one of which is not all that bad, the other of which could be really problematic. So the first category is the voter suppression techniques that we all know and love from 2020, uh, purges and ridiculous ID
Sure.
requirements and harassing people who are trying to help people vote and a dozen things. Um, that has pretty well been damped down, at least in the seven crucial states where you
Hmm.
have five of them run by Democrats. Uh, the sixth one is Nevada, where you have a Democratic AG, a Democratic uh, Secretary of the
Secretary
State,
of State. Yeah.
and a Republican governor who's not a Trumpy. And then the seventh state is Georgia, where you have Kemp completely at swords points with the Trumpies,
Right.
trying to fire this insane electoral commission. And so we're almost
And the
seven for
Secretary of State as well, right?
at Raffensperger.
Raffensperger
Yeah,
was, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So in terms of the key swing states, we're almost seven for seven in
Right.
terms of state government not being in favor of that kind of voter suppression. However,
Right.
and there are two big howevers. First of all, there's all the down ballot stuff, beginning with six very tight Senate races. And
Right.
some of those Senate races are in red states. So if you have voter suppression, um,
Montana, Ohio. Yeah.
yeah, and Florida, where you have a very unpopular sitting senator, Rick Scott, potentially we could pick that seat up, but there's a lot of voter suppression in Florida. There's even more voter suppression in Texas, where maybe in a fair fight, Allred could knock off Cruz. So, and
Right.
then you have all the other down ballot stuff. You also have county level uh, nastiness, and the sleeper here is efforts to delay the count and delay
Yeah.
certification, which can be done at the county level, both by having county commissioners delay the certification, which then affects the statewide certification, and even more nefariously, you've got a lot of violence where Trump has psyched the craziest people in his base up to believe that the election has already been stolen even before it starts. And so you're going to have vigilantes descending on county courthouses, intimidating the people, the professional
Right.
election workers. You even have a plot to have them get jobs as election workers. And then on top of that, you've got guys like Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, in this whole effort to reopen alleged voting fraud cases from 2022, which have been cold for a year and a half, as a
Mm.
way of sending a signal to Hispanic voters in four counties that if you fail
Mm.
to dot an I or cross a T, you're going to end up in jail. And one of the experts I talked to referred to this with a lovely term. This is promoting self-suppression. So you
Right.
don't suppress the voters, but you intimidate the voters so that they're too scared to vote.
Right.
So that's the sleeper. So
Yeah.
it's not like voting suppression has gone away. It's taking different forms, and it's probably okay in the seven swing states where the presidency is going to be decided. But in order for Harris to be an effective president to govern, she needs a trifecta. And this could
Right.
mess up the Senate, could even mess up the House. So that's my net.
Absolutely. And, we're starting to see polls out of Montana that are really not good for John
No.
Tester.
Yep.
And if you sort of write off that, there aren't a lot of pieces on the board that are available. And as you say, two of the only pieces left for Democrats would be to pick up seats in Florida or Texas, where this type of, if voting is speech, then this is self-censorship. This kind of thing is going to be at the top of the list. And those machineries are all controlled by Republicans. They're going to do their utmost to kind of it's. I mean, it really is a form of suppression, but it's kind of a form of suppression where it's a bit more hands off, right? The direct suppression is you need an ID. We're going to throw out your vote because it's a provisional ballot or whatever. This is we're going to make you so scared to vote that you're not going to do it, and so we're going to literally suppress your ability to vote by scaring you.
Yeah. Now, the good thing about Florida is you've got abortion on the ballot. And so
Right.
that could bring out a lot of, potential anti-Scott voters. So that
You
that
you
might be
you
close.
also have it on the ballot in Montana. in fact, there are 10 states where abortion is on the ballot, including Montana, where it's actually abortion is generally legal in Montana now, and this would codify it. You also have an interesting situation in Nebraska where, and we wrote about this week, Gabrielle Gurley wrote about it. There are actually two abortion ballot measures on the ballot in Nebraska. One would tighten up to, I believe, a 6-week ban, and the other would allow for abortion at the point of viability, fetal viability, up until that point. So whatever ballot measure gets more votes will win, essentially. And there are now these legal machinations to try to throw one or both off of the ballot because of something very obscure in Nebraska's constitution called the single subject rule. And so they're trying to say that these ballot measures, and particularly the pro-abortion rights ballot measure, violates that rule. But even if one of them is on the ballot, it's going to draw people out. And here's why Nebraska is interesting, right? So Nebraska apportions its electoral votes by district. And in 2020, Joe Biden won the 2nd district of Nebraska. It's basically Omaha, which is a little more liberal. It's mostly a toss-up district. Republican controls the House seat right now, but polling has shown Harris winning that district. They've spent a lot more money. Actually, I don't think Trump has spent any money in that district, and Harris has spent millions. They've sent Tim Walz, who is a native Nebraskan, to that district. And the polling shows them ahead, and also shows the Democrat running for the House ahead in that district. That one electoral vote sounds like nothing, but is actually extremely important, because if you have the blue wall states hold, and Harris loses Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, Harris still wins, but only if she gets that blue dot, only if she gets that one electoral vote. Otherwise, it's 269.
And also, by the way, if I'm up on the story, the Republican effort to get the governor to call a special session to have statewide electoral voting, that failed. So
that
they
did
haven't
fail.
succeeded.
Not only did that fail, but the state of Maine, which also apportions by electoral, by congressional district, came out and said, if you change Nebraska, your way of apportioning electoral votes, we're going to do the same thing. And that matters because Trump has in the past won the 2nd district of Maine, which is a swing seat, and he's won that in the past. So it would sort of be a flip if Nebraska went ahead and tried to do that. So it's still in play.
Isn't it Nebraska where there's an independent Senate candidate?
Yeah, let's also talk about that. So, and we're going to have some reporting on this. Emma Jansen, our writing fellow, is readying a piece right now that'll probably be out Monday. But yes, there is an independent guy by the name of Dan Osborne, who is a former union organizer. He worked at Kellogg, and he organized a strike against Kellogg that ended up, being successful for the union. And he's running against Deb Fischer, who's an incumbent Republican. And the polls have been weird all year on this seat. So Fischer's internals show her up by 25, and Osborne has put out internals showing it tied. So somebody was really, really wrong, right? And an independent poll came out just in the last week that shows actually Osborne's right. It is pretty much a tied race. And so my sleeper reason for this that I don't think a lot of people have talked about is Osborne's last name. So Osborne is a name of political and, more important, football royalty in the state of Nebraska. Dr. Tom Osborne was the coach of the University of Nebraska football team that won several national titles in the 80s. He then went into politics. He served 3 terms the House as a House member from Nebraska, and then lost a gubernatorial election back in 2006. He's still alive. He's like 87 years old or something. Um, I'll be willing to bet that there are a lot of people in Nebraska who think Dan Osborne is related to Tom Osborne. Now, they actually spell their names differently. Dr. Tom Osborne has an E. Dan Osborne doesn't have an E at the end of his last name. But I guarantee you that's some of what's going on, that there's an assumed familial relationship. And I wouldn't be surprised if Deb Fischer ran an ad with Republican Dr. Tom Osborne at some point saying, this isn't my son. This isn't, I'm not related to this guy, and I endorse Deb Fischer.
Is this a dig against Nebraska's literacy?
Well, no, I mean, I think this happens all the time, right? 2 years ago, Summer Lee, the Democratic squad member from Pittsburgh, was running for her seat. She was trying to replace a guy named Mike Doyle, who was in Congress for, I don't know, 20 years, right? And the Republicans ended up running a guy named Mike Doyle against Summer Lee. And she was threatened in that race, even though it's a very blue seat, because people probably looked at it and said, yeah, Mike Doyle. I know Mike Doyle. I'll vote for Mike Doyle. He's a different guy.
Yeah.
So this happens a lot. I mean, this is not abnormal. But that Nebraska seat is really, really interesting because, more to the point, Osborne is running as an independent. He's running a populist campaign. He's running on union rights. He's running against sort of the status quo republicanism that pervades Nebraska. And I don't think it's all because of the Dr. Tom Osborne name thing. I think he's getting some adherents. So it's a really interesting race, and we're going to have a very good piece.
There's a lot of, William Jennings Bryan. There's a lot of, was Nebraska, and there's a lot of latent populism still a century later in a lot of these Midwestern and Western states.
Yes, and what we're starting to see is people running either as an independent. In the case of Osborne, Democrats aren't running a candidate in Nebraska. The only two on the ballot will be Fischer and Osborne. There's no other candidate on the ballot. So whether they're running as an independent or running as Democrats, we're starting to see candidates try populism in these red areas to see if that can attract a different breed of people who maybe voted Democrat in the past and moved away from the party. That's what this story, I'm previewing it now, but that's what the story is going to be about. There's a candidate in North Dakota who is actually running that kind of a campaign, and as well Lucas Kunce, who you and I both know, running in Missouri against Josh Hawley, definitely on those populist issues.
Hawley purports to be a kind of a populist. The states are coming back to their, 30 years ago, they all sent populist Democrats to Congress. It's not that long ago.
Right. Absolutely. All right. We have about 20 minutes left. We have a couple more things I wanted to cover. The first thing is, I don't know if you saw this. We haven't talked about this, but so Trump went to the New York Economic Club yesterday. And he basically, as much as Trump can, he laid out his economic vision for the country. And his economic vision is really focused on tariffs, and not just targeted tariffs, but these across the board 10%, 20%, maybe even higher tariffs on all goods coming into the country. And he thinks he's going to make so much money off of these tariffs that it will pay for everything that under the sun. He was asked about childcare. He's like, well, the tariffs will make so much money. Childcare is nothing. We can handle that with all this tariff money that's going to be coming in. Now, you obviously have looked at trade issues for forever, and I'm sure you have some ideas on whether going back to the era of William McKinley is a good idea or not.
So high tariffs for their own sake are a really dumb idea, because you're increasing the cost of purchasing everything.
It's essentially
However,
a tax. It's a tax
yeah,
on all goods.
paid by
Yeah.
consumers. However, selective tariffs married to an industrial policy, that's smart, going back to Alexander Hamilton. And to some extent, um,
And that's what
that's
Biden's been doing, right? Yeah.
that's what I was going to say. Biden's been doing that, and specifically when you have a foreign country that is violating all the rules of the trading system, then you have targeted tariffs against that foreign country, in this case, China. And what's
Right.
interesting is that the Trump version of the China tariffs, of the architect of which was Bob Lighthizer, who I often refer to as Trump's only good appointee, um, was not married to any kind of domestic program. That fell to Biden. And so
Right.
even Lighthizer's program was just purely negative. It was
So,
25%
so
across
yeah,
the
I
board
mean,
tariffs,
what you're saying is like in Trump's term, he was putting these targeted tariffs in
but not
and
complementing.
doing nothing on the domestic side, just assuming like, oh, if there are tariffs, then companies will somehow, by their own volition, spring up and produce the goods that won't be
Exactly.
coming over from other countries. What Biden has done is said, actually, we're gonna do very direct strategies to rebuild our industrial base in America,
Yeah.
and if we combine that with some targeted tariffs, then we're
Yeah.
going to create a situation where we can actually rebuild a manufacturing base.
Yeah. And so I can just imagine how that speech went down with most of the people who were members of the New York Economic Club. I mean, this is the last thing in
Right,
the world that the Republican
right,
establishment wants, because A, the Republican establishment doesn't believe in industrial policy. B, the Republican establishment likes doing outsourcing. And if you do outsourcing, there's suddenly a 20% or 10%, whatever it is, tax when you try to bring back those inputs or goods into the United States. So I'm
right.
sure he alienated almost all of the audience. And to the extent that there are some people who are supporters of tariffs when they are linked to industrial policy, he didn't even do that.
Right.
So there's nobody who
It
supports this.
it's a good point that it's not just you're not just talking about finished goods. We're talking about inputs. And
Right,
even when you're building in America, until we have our supply chains up for things like solar production, for
right.
things like the minerals that you need to make lithium ion batteries or whatever, we're going to have to source those inputs from somewhere. The administration has put together this kind of concept of friendshoring, where we do it from companies that are friendly to our interests. But you're going to have to do it from somewhere. And if you do across the board tariffs, then forget friendshoring. And even if you're making things in America, they're going to be more expensive to make because you have to source some of the key critical inputs from
Yeah.
overseas.
He's like a kid with a shiny new object, and
Right.
tariffs are going to be the panacea for everything. And nobody believes that, not left, not right, not center. He's all by
Right.
himself.
And the calculation is crazy because the whole idea here is that we're going to make so much money. He actually literally sees it as a money making program. I mean, I think almost more than rebuilding jobs and industrial policy in the U.S. He sees it as, oh, I can just charge everybody 20%. I can take that money. And I mean, I'm sure he does this in his hotels. He just charges, it's like a junk fee. He charges
Right.
20% and then he gives it to himself. But here he's trying to do that to the whole world on tariffs, and what they'll do is say, well, we won't send the goods because we won't pay that tariff. So you'll obviously get less trade as a result of that,
Yeah.
and you're not backing it up by increasing homemade manufacturing.
So the interesting question to me politically is whether anybody is going to vote for Trump based on this. And conversely, is anybody going to vote against Trump based on this? I mean, does his economic program matter electorally at all?
Yeah, I mean, does any policy matter at all when you're talking about an election?
I mean, it may
That's why I
scare.
think, I mean, to get back to what we were saying at the beginning, that's why I think optics. That's why I think something like where Harris adopts the entire tax policy of the Biden administration and then says, "Oh, but not that, and not that, and not that." that gives you I mean, it's unfair, but people see that and they look at someone's leadership, and it's like, you just accepted that a week ago, and now you're changing your mind. And is this the kind of erratic behavior that I want to endorse?
So, but let's relate this to the debate, which we have not talked about yet.
Yeah, the debate is
So,
Tuesday. Yeah.
right. So if Harris, so if you were coaching Harris,
Hmm.
um, in the debate, would you coach her to point out how completely screwball the Trump proposal on tariffs is, or is that just not salient enough?
I mean, I think in all these things you have to play it back to values, right? So for me, yes, you can talk about that, how this makes absolutely no sense on any kind of economic level, but you have to put that back into, this is an erratic guy who has insane policy ideas, and he's going to bankrupt the country. I mean, whatever, however you
Yeah,
want to frame
it's
that,
one
but you have to,
it's one more manifestation of the fact that Trump is a crackpot, and that has
correct.
to be the theme
You
over
have to
and over and
bring
over.
it
Yep.
you have to bring it back to that. That would be my, I mean, look, I'm not a debate prepper, but that would be my advice, is that bring it back to your main theme. Keep hammering that main theme. This guy's weird. That's a weird idea. I mean, if you
How do
want
you
to do
think
it
she's going
that
to do
way.
it?
Well, look, I've interviewed Kamala Harris in the past. I've obviously seen her in interviews. I've seen her in debates. Probably the last debate she did was in what would that have been? 2016. She did a couple debates
Well,
here for the attorney.
she had one vice presidential debate
Right,
against Pence.
which I don't really remember too much. It was pretty low key. But what I do remember are, she debated Loretta Sanchez when she was running for Senate. And Loretta Sanchez was kind of, everybody kind of knew she wasn't going to win. But she also debated Steve Cooley. Steve Cooley in 2010 was running for attorney general. He was the very popular district attorney of Los Angeles. And he was actually favored to win that race. This was 2010. Schwarzenegger wasn't too long ago. There was still a chance for a moderate Republican to win in California. And he was looking to win. He was ahead in the polls. They did a debate, and he was asked a question about uh, basically, if he left the office of the district attorney to become attorney general, he would be eligible for a pension from the city of Los Angeles. And he was asked about that. This was a time when there were these stories about runaway pensions in cities all around LA County. And he said, yeah, I'll take that pension because I earned it. And and the brilliance of what Harris did, not only did she cut that 30 seconds into an ad, and that ad probably won her the race, but in the moment, she let him dig his own grave. She let him say that. And she didn't step, she's like, you heard him. I think that's actually what she said after Cooley said that. She allowed that to happen. I think there will be moments in this debate with Trump where she can just point to, listen to what you just heard, right? Right. Let's break that down. What you just heard this guy say. And, she can take that and use it as fodder. I think, that little moment in 2010 that I remember very vividly is a good example for the kind of thing she can do. Okay. So I got one last thing on my list. I wrote about this today. I was at the DNC, and on the final day, they had this kid who I had interviewed before, a guy named Nathan Horns, who was a victim of Corinthian colleges. He was a defrauded for-profit college student. He went on stage. He said, Kamala Harris helped shut down Corinthian colleges when she was Attorney General of California. Kamala Harris helped, as vice president, get all of the Corinthian loans forgiven. And so I thank her for helping us have a brighter future. I remember that. That was a big moment for the student debt relief movement to have a for-profit college student who was defrauded on stage at the Democratic National Convention. Well, turns out yesterday a lawsuit is dropped accusing Mohela, which is a servicer. Basically, these student loans, they're all issued by the government. Then we have private companies collect the money and do day-to-day operations on all these loans. So the government said, we're canceling all the Corinthian loans. This was 2 years ago, they said this. We're going to cancel all these Corinthian loans. They sent letters to every Corinthian student saying, we're going to cancel your loans. We're going to refund you all the money you paid on that loan. And this is going to happen. Mohela is the company that has to execute that. And they just haven't done it. So not only do they continue to ask for money for these loans that have been canceled, they continue to send them to credit agencies, meaning they're in default, and it hurts people's credit scores. And they continue to pursue debt collection on these particular loans. And so this is a real embarrassment for Harris, who elevated this whole thing about defending for-profit college students. And it turns out it's all on paper that they canceled these loans. In reality, these loans are still alive. And so the students are saying, look, you were told to cancel the loans, Mohela. You haven't done it. We're suing you.
So whose responsibility in the government is it to follow through on the statement that the loans are being canceled?
It's the Department of Education, particularly the Office of Federal Student Aid.
And so who screwed up?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in talking to some people, I think it's a combination of Mohela being completely unequipped to do pretty much anything when it comes to servicing student loans. And this has been true time and time again. They have been sanctioned for not following the rules. They've been sued in class action suits multiple times. They've had payments withheld by the government, although eventually those payments got through. They got $300 million of taxpayer money in 2023. So part of it is just Mohela is a terrible operator. But the other part of it is
they work for the government.
They work for the government. The government can fire them. The government can mandate that they do things the right way, and they just haven't done it. And there's more of an interest in getting a big headline number and announcing it in a showy press conference than actually doing the hard work of implementing the announcement. And that's the problem.
Yeah. Well, the reform, I mean, we can have a long conversation about the ultimate reform of the student loan program, but as long as you're going to have student debt at all, you should do what Social Security does and just have the government administer the damn thing directly. Why do you need all these third-party contractors who we don't even control?
100%.
Yeah.
The U.S. government, I mean, if you think about it, the biggest agency in the world that collects payments is the Internal Revenue Service.
Yeah. And they don't.
Why do you need to outsource this little payment collection to private companies that have shown no ability to do the job when you have the IRS sitting right there that can just, bill people and take the money?
It's a public option. Dave, we got about 3 more minutes. I want to raise one other issue that we can possibly solve in 3 minutes that I've written about. That's the issue of Israel. And
3 minutes for that? Okay.
Yeah, well, a minute and a half. Here's the minute and a half. I would like to see Harris take a much harder line on Netanyahu. On the other hand, I think, as we used to say in the days of bomb shelter drills, I think her strategy between now and the election has been duck and cover, and that's the right strategy, because there's no way she can win by tweaking the administration's stance towards Israel, which isn't even her province. I do think the one disgraceful thing that they did that shows how averse they are to doing anything on this was not letting 2 Palestinian American state legislators who wanted to speak at the convention. And the one speech by the woman who was a Palestinian American state legislator in Georgia was about as tame as you could possibly imagine. It basically said, I grieve for my relatives and relatives of my friends who've been killed in these horrible raids on Gazan civilians, but Trump hates me because I'm a Muslim, and Kamala can have a much better chance at brokering a
Right.
ceasefire, and we all need to unite and vote for Kamala. Even that was too much for the people who were vetting these speeches. Every single speech at the convention was vetted. You had to swear in blood
Yeah.
that you would not depart from the teleprompter. And this would have gone down very nicely in Michigan. It would not have scared off one Jewish vote, and they were still too risk averse on this. So,
I completely agree with you. I was there talking to delegates who engaged in a sit-in outside the United Center in Chicago
right,
because of the refusal to allow a Palestinian
disgraceful.
American to speak. And you know, I'm not endorsing this, but I think what they were afraid of is that there would be 5 seconds of a speaker that said, "I am a Palestinian American," and then 25 seconds in an ad of you know, Hamas you know,
Right.
engaging in killing of
Yeah, right.
Israelis. So that's what they're afraid of. I'm not endorsing that. I agree with you.
No.
Um,
But I hope that when
but
she's elected, we get a change policy.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's in the very same tough spot that Hubert Humphrey was in 1968. So, you know, people were telling him to break with Johnson on Vietnam. He was the sitting vice president. He didn't want to do that. He did it late, and it ended up being, you know,
First of both worlds.
ineffectual to win the race.
Yep.
If he broke earlier, he probably would have won the race.
Yep.
Harris has, you know, I mean, the thing she did this week, she was willing to do is she broke with Biden on capital gains tax rates. You know,
Courageous.
imagine if she would have broke with Biden on you know, at least even a small amount on the Israel issue. I think it would have helped in certain states. So you know, we'll see what happens. We got 8 weeks to go. Bob Kuttner, thank you very much for being here. We do this every Friday, 12:30 Eastern, and we will have an archive of this up on the site as we always do. You can check out the weekly roundup this weekend. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.